I knew something was wrong the second they called me upstairs without notice. There was no calendar invite. No memo. Just a tight-lipped assistant telling me, "Lucas wants to see you." Now, my stomach dropped. I'd worked at Evidra Solutions for 17 years. Long enough to recognize when a meeting wasn't really a meeting, it was an execution. When I stepped into the glass-walled conference room, he was already there, Lucas Denning, the young CEO with a Harvard smile and Silicon Valley eyes. He never even learned how to pronounce my last name. Sitting beside him was Victoria Langston from Our. Her hands folded, her expression unreadable. No small talk, no sugarcoating, just 5 words. Your position is being eliminated. 17 years. Gone. Just like that. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, because if I moved any faster, I'd come undone. I walked out without a word. The hallway stretched endlessly, faces turning away like I'd suddenly become contagious. By the time I reached my office, the email was already waiting. Separation agreement attached. So cold, so final, like I was just a transaction. Another name wiped off the payroll. As I packed up the pieces of my life into a cardboard box, my hand brushed against something small, cool metal tucked away in my drawer. A pendant, the one my wife, Hannah, gave me on our 10th anniversary. It had one tiny word etched into it: endure. I slid it over my head instinctively. It felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe because I needed it more now than ever. Behind me, I could hear faint whispers from the design team. No one said anything. A few people looked over, their eyes full of pity, but also fear. No one wants to talk to the person who just got erased. But even then, I wasn't angry. Not yet. Not until I started piecing together just how long this had been in motion. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so hard to pin down. The unraveling was slow, deliberate, like someone dimming the lights one bulb at a time, hoping you wouldn't notice the dark creeping in. At first, it was subtle. My name disappeared from the leadership meeting invites. I thought it was a clerical mistake. I even joked about it to Ellie from operations. But she just gave me a sympathetic smile and shrugged. Then I was pulled from a major city project I'd helped shape from the ground up. No explanation, no reassignment, just gone. Still, I stayed quiet. I chalked it up to internal reorgs. Shifting priorities. That was the company line. Anyway, I'd been at Evidra since it was a startup above a diner in downtown Minneapolis. Back when we pulled 18-hour shifts over bad coffee and shared dreams. I had history here, real history. Surely that still meant something. But the signs kept coming. Design files I once had full access to were suddenly locked behind permissions. The budgeting dashboard I helped create? Gone from my login. I couldn't even see our latest vendor lists without filing a request. Security updates, IT said with a sterile tone. System improvements. No one said the words out loud. But I heard them anyway. Obsolete. Expensive. Legacy. Lucas Denning had come in like a storm 2 years ago, young. Charming. All sharp suits and disruption slogans. He talked about scalability, vertical integration, digital pivots. I was open to change. Hell, I welcomed it. I even mentored some of the fresh-faced analysts he brought over from San Francisco. I thought there was room for both, the new and the old. Turns out I was wrong. I remember the exact moment I realized I was being erased. It was a Thursday evening. The office was nearly empty. Just the low hum of ventilation and the glow of my screen. I was staying late to finalize floor plans for the Greenridge complex. A high-profile project I'd chased for over 2 years. I needed access to the structural database to cross-check measurements. But when I entered my credentials, I was locked out. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. I messaged IT, half laughing at what I thought was a technical hiccup. The response came back in under 2 minutes. Your permissions have been modified by executive directive. Please consult with your supervisor. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. That weekend, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through everything in my mind, trying to convince myself that I was imagining it, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew the truth. They were phasing me out, quietly, efficiently, like clearing a whiteboard. I started paying closer attention. Really paying attention. That's when I noticed it. Vendor invoices that didn't line up. Material orders without matching project codes. Contracts processed without architectural reviews. And a name that kept popping up on everything new. Summit Core LLC. I'd never heard of them. That was strange. I'd been with Evidra long enough to know every major contractor. Every third-party vendor we worked with. We were a tight-knit ecosystem. And this new name didn't belong. I dug deeper. There were no project photos. No inspection reports. No site logs tied to Summit Core. Just payments. Large ones. First $12. Then $80. Then $140. All billed for consulting or material strategy. Vague. Too vague. I ran a background check on the company. Registered just 6 months ago. Mailing address? A rented mailbox inside a strip mall 2 miles from Evidra's headquarters. There was no website, no portfolio, no contact person listed, except one name on the business registration form that nearly knocked the air out of me. Alan Denning, Lucas's uncle. Suddenly, everything clicked. The access restrictions, the slow isolation, the security updates. They hadn't just been trying to remove me. They were trying to remove an obstacle. I knew the procurement system better than anyone. I knew how money flowed through Evidra. I could spot a fake invoice from across the room. And that made me dangerous. They weren't pushing me out because I was outdated. They were pushing me out because I was watching. The betrayal didn't come with yelling or backstabbing. It came in silences, in closed doors, in the way people you trained stopped meeting your eyes in the hallway. But I wasn't going down quietly. I started documenting everything, every invoice, every timestamp, every access change to my credentials. I traced back the digital trail from Summit Core to internal approvals. Watched the signatures accumulate, Lucas's S. The CFOs, even 2 mid-level managers I once mentored. They were all in on it. Every night after work, I went home, pulled up files, took screenshots, stored backups. I created folders inside folders, encrypted them, backed them up twice. I kept one on a drive hidden inside my old drafting case. Another inside my kitchen flour jar. Yeah, I was being paranoid, but when you realize your company's leadership is siphoning money through shell firms while gutting the people who helped build it, paranoia starts to look like common sense. The worst part wasn't that they lied. It was that they thought I wouldn't notice. That I'd just quietly pack my things and vanish. They underestimated me. I wasn't loud. I didn't throw chairs or write scathing emails. I played the long game. I kept showing up, kept smiling, kept nodding in meetings even after my role was gutted to scraps. Because every minute I stayed, I was collecting evidence, building something far sturdier than resentment. I was building a case. And I had no intention of letting it go to waste. The night I uncovered the truth about Summit Core LLC, or rather, the truth about Lucas and his uncle, I sat in the dark, staring at the screen as if it might change its mind. My hands were frozen over the keyboard. For a long time, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of it all settled over me like concrete. This wasn't just a shady vendor. This was fraud. This was embezzlement. And it had been unfolding right beneath the noses of everyone who'd spent years building this company. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. The city lights from Minneapolis flickered outside my window, casting reflections across my office walls. Somewhere in the next room, my wife Hannah was reading. I could hear the faint turning of a page, the hum of her tea mug being set down. She didn't come in to ask what was wrong. After 15 years, she could read the silence. I ran a hand over the pendant around my neck. Endure. That one word had always grounded me. But tonight, it wasn't enough just to endure. I needed to act. But I also needed to be smart. Storming into Evidra with accusations and backup files would be a mistake. They'd spin it. They'd call me bitter, disgruntled, vengeful. I'd be the one on trial, not the crime. No, I needed to be careful, methodical, strategic. I spent the next 3 nights pulling together a clean, professional, airtight dossier. I sorted invoices by date, highlighted discrepancies, cross-referenced approvals with internal emails and timestamp logs. I found patterns, dates where project delays were faked, material costs inflated, Duplicate vendor charges issued under different project codes. All traced back to Summit Core. And Lucas Denning. I encrypted everything and saved it in 3 locations. One on an offline flash drive in my home safe. One uploaded to a secure cloud under a pseudonym. And the third, my favorite, inside a hollowed-out architecture textbook on my shelf labeled Modern Frameworks, 2008 edition. I had learned long ago never to rely on just one backup. You don't spend your life building structures without understanding redundancy. Then, I drafted the email. It took me hours. I rewrote it 6 times. Eventually, I settled on a subject line that was neutral but urgent. Subject: financial irregularities. Request for immediate review. The message itself was short, direct, and clinical. No emotion, no accusations, just bullet points with attached evidence, outlining suspicious payments, lack of oversight, and the ownership connection between Summit Core and Lucas Denning's family. I didn't sign my name. Instead, I used an internal Avidra test account that had never been properly deactivated. One of those small oversights in the system no one ever pays attention to, except me. IT should have revoked the login years ago. But they hadn't. Lucky me. I scheduled the email to send at exactly 9 a.m. on the morning of the quarterly board meeting. The timing was intentional. Lucas would be standing at the front of the boardroom, presenting Avidra's latest success story, probably boasting about leaner operations, higher profit margins, and digital modernization. The email would land just as he hit his second PowerPoint slide. I didn't plan to be anywhere near the building. Instead, that morning, I sat in a quiet cafe across town, my laptop closed in front of me, a hot mug of coffee in my hands. I watched the street outside, but my mind was still inside those conference room walls, imagining the board members' reactions as the attachments downloaded, as the numbers unfolded, as the ownership link became undeniable. At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. By 9:37, another call, this one from Avidra's general counsel. The subject line of the follow-up email read, "Confidential inquiry, urgent response requested." I took a deep breath and smiled into my cup. They were scrambling. By 10 a.m., a message came through from a friend in finance, someone I trusted. Someone who had once taught me how to read balance sheets like blueprints. "Something's up. Lucas just got pulled into a private meeting with 2 board members. He looks pale. CFO 2. I refreshed Avidra's internal news feed from a dummy employee portal I still had access to. It had gone dark. No posts, no updates, no announcements. That never happened, not on board meeting days. At 10:30 a.m., another message. Emergency freeze on all new vendor contracts, including Summit Core. Word is, they're calling in external auditors. And just like that, the structure began to shake. By noon, I had transferred the full dossier, plus the deeper layers I hadn't included in the first email, to an encrypted legal repository. Just in case anything happened. Paranoia? Maybe, but I'd seen what people were capable of when they felt power slipping through their fingers. I wasn't taking chances. At 1:14 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, I picked up. "Ruby." The voice was tight, controlled, but barely. "It's Lucas. We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He continued quickly. "Maybe we can sit down. Figure out a way through this that doesn't escalate." I let the silence hang for several beats. "There's no misunderstanding, Lucas," I finally said. "You misunderstood who you were dealing with." Then I hung up. I stood from my booth and stepped outside into the afternoon sun. The breeze was sharp, but for the first time in months, my chest felt light, not because it was over, but because it was just beginning. I always believed good work would protect you. That was my first mistake. For years, I thought loyalty mattered, that if you showed up early, stayed late, delivered results, helped others rise, you'd earn something stronger than a paycheck. You'd earn permanence. I thought integrity was a kind of armor. But it wasn't. It was a target, and I was standing in the center. The fallout came fast after the email detonated. I didn't have to wonder if they'd read it. The silence told me they had. Avidra's normally humming internal channels went dead. People I hadn't heard from in months started messaging me, some cautiously curious, others afraid. A junior architect I mentored 3 years ago wrote, "Whatever you did, thank you." At first, I felt vindicated. But as the hours turned into days, the weight of it all settled in. I hadn't just exposed corruption. I'd shaken the foundation of the very company I helped build. For the first time since I hit send, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I regretted it, but because part of me still loved what Avidra used to be. The people, the projects, the endless nights we spent sketching dreams that turned into cityscapes. That wasn't fake, that part was real, and now, it was gone. But something in me was changing too. I used to think speaking out meant burning bridges. That the only way to survive in silence was to become smaller, more invisible. But the truth is, silence doesn't protect you, it just delays the damage. And I was done being silent. Lucas had made a critical mistake. He underestimated the power of a woman who's had everything taken from her, except her memory, her conviction, and her blueprint for the truth. When Avidra's board launched a formal investigation, I thought I would feel relief. I didn't. I felt responsibility. Suddenly, my inbox was full of former employees, people I hadn't heard from in years, sharing similar stories. Times they'd been ignored, pushed aside, paid less, stripped of projects, laid off quietly while executives pocketed bonuses. I hadn't just struck a nerve, I had opened a floodgate. That's when I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about repair, about accountability, about legacy. And that shift inside me? It was seismic. For so long, I let them define my worth. Every review, every raise, every project I was or wasn't assigned, I treated it like proof of who I was. But now, I understood something deeper. My value was never tied to my title. It was in the way I held the company together through chaos. The way I trained others even when I was excluded. The way I noticed the cracks and cared enough to act, even when it meant becoming the enemy in someone else's story. There's a strange kind of power in realizing they can take your job, your badge, your access codes, but they can't take your conscience. The perspective shift didn't come all at once. It happened in small, quiet moments. It happened when I watched a friend inside the company risk her position to leak what was happening in the aftermath. It happened when the board's legal counsel reached out, not to threaten me, but to ask for help verifying the internal architecture of the scheme. It happened when the same HR officer who sat silently across from me on my last day messaged, "You were right." One afternoon, a package showed up on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a manila envelope. Printed photos, scans of receipts, copies of Slack messages between Lucas and the CFO discussing Summit Core by name. Evidence, hard evidence, proof I hadn't known existed. Someone was helping from inside. That was the turning point. I wasn't alone anymore. I never had been. I had just been the first to step forward. It's funny how quickly fear changes sides. In the early weeks, I was the one glancing over my shoulder, hesitating before checking my mailbox, wondering if I'd be sued, blacklisted, erased. But now, Lucas was the one avoiding board meetings. The CFO had stopped showing up entirely. 3 project managers resigned within a span of 10 days. Investigators had been brought in. External, federal. They weren't calling me a problem anymore. They were calling me a resource. I still wasn't sure what I wanted. Part of me wanted to walk away from it all, build something new, somewhere better. But another part, the part that remembered who we used to be, wanted to stay, not to fix the past, but to shape what came next. One morning, I stood outside Avidra's headquarters, watching through the glass facade as a new team of compliance officers walked through the doors. Not architects, not designers, people whose job it was to audit and dismantle the rot. And I felt something unexpected. Hope, real hope. Maybe this was what real rebuilding looked like. Not blueprints, not renderings, but accountability. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to come back, not as an employee desperate to be included, but as a woman who had remembered her power. This time, I wouldn't wait to be invited in. I'd bring the blueprint with me. 3 weeks after the storm broke, I got a call I didn't expect. It was from Naomi Becker, One of the longest-serving board members at Avidra. A quiet force. Respected but rarely vocal. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ruby," she said, "we'd like to meet. Off the record. Somewhere neutral." That's how I found myself sitting in a private booth at a modest cafe overlooking the Mississippi River. The kind of place no one from Avidra's executive team would be caught dead in. Naomi showed up 5 minutes early. Coffee in hand. No assistant. No blazer. Just a sharp-eyed woman who had clearly spent the last few weeks looking through the ashes of the company she helped guide. She didn't mince words. "We owe you," she said, and not just an apology. A real opportunity. I stayed quiet. She continued. "The investigation confirmed everything. The invoices, the ghost contracts, the shell companies. Lucas and the CFO will face charges. But beyond the scandal, we're left with a deeper problem. Rot at the roots. A culture of silence, of obedience. We need to change that. And we need someone who knows what integrity looks like in practice." I blinked. "Are you offering me my old job back?" She smiled gently. "No, I'm offering you a new one." Naomi slid a sealed folder across the table. Inside was a proposal. A real one. Printed. Signed by 3 members of the board. They weren't asking me to rejoin the design team. They were offering me a seat in executive leadership. Title: Chief Integrity Officer. It came with full audit authority, an independent budget, and a direct reporting line to the board. No interference from any CEO. No bureaucratic middlemen. You'd have the power to restructure our internal practices, Naomi said, to rebuild trust, from the ground up. I didn't answer right away. I needed time, not just to consider the offer, but to feel whether it came from the right place. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't interested in a title for the sake of ego. What I wanted, what I needed, was purpose. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Hannah. She didn't say anything at first. Just listened as I laid it all out, the role, the risks, the responsibility. Finally, she looked at me and said, "You already did the hard part. You stood up, now you get to choose what happens next." I slept on it. 3 nights. 3 long, restless nights of pacing, rereading the proposal, thinking about all the versions of myself that had been buried over the years. Quiet Ruby. Loyal Ruby. Overlooked Ruby. And whether this version, this transformed version, was ready to go back into the belly of the same building where she'd been erased. And on the 4th morning, I knew. I wasn't going back to reclaim a seat at the table. I was going back to rebuild the table entirely. I accepted the offer, with conditions. I wanted full access to conduct anonymous interviews across departments. I wanted a whistleblower protocol. I wanted DAI consultants brought in to audit hiring and promotion pipelines. I wanted the authority to terminate contracts and reassign leadership positions where necessary. No rubber stamp, no window dressing, real teeth. To my surprise, the board agreed. That week, news broke publicly. Avidra released a brief but striking statement announcing new leadership positions and a renewed commitment to ethics, transparency, and cultural healing. My name wasn't front and center, but it was mentioned, subtly. That was enough. The first time I walked back into Avidra's headquarters, everything felt different, not quieter, sharper. People looked up as I passed, not with fear, with recognition. Some even nodded, some smiled. They had heard. They knew. I wasn't back as an employee trying to climb her way back up. I was there as a mirror, and as a builder. I met with every department within the first month. Some welcomed me, others were wary, but most were simply tired. Tired of pretending not to see the cracks. Tired of being told that silence was loyalty. I didn't come in swinging. I came in listening. I asked real questions. When did you stop feeling safe to speak up? What made you trust this place less? What do you need to stay? And the answers, they were raw, honest, brave, and heartbreaking. Designers who hadn't had raises in 3 years. Assistants whose ideas were constantly co-opted by higher-ups. Senior staff afraid to report harassment for fear of retaliation. It wasn't just Lucas who had failed them. It was the system that let him thrive. That's what I had been brought back to dismantle. Bit by bit, I got to work. We launched a blind feedback system tied to performance reviews. We overhauled vendor policies with third-party verification. We offered anonymous reporting channels, not just for fraud, but for culture. I set monthly check-ins with a rotating group of employees at every level. Not for show, for truth. I didn't fix it all overnight. I'm not naive, but I built infrastructure. The kind you don't see in press releases or company brochures. The kind that keeps people from falling through the cracks again. One morning, 6 months in, I paused outside the design floor, my old world. A junior designer, maybe 23, passed me in the hallway. She stopped, turned, and said softly, "Thank you, for making it safe again." That was the moment. The moment I knew I had made the right decision. It wasn't about punishing the bad. It was about protecting the good. And sometimes, that starts with just one person deciding that silence isn't strength. That loyalty isn't submission. That your voice, even cracked, even late, is enough to change the entire direction of a place that forgot how to listen. I used to think growth came in a straight line: experience, promotion, title, respect. I thought the longer you stayed, the more you gave, the more secure you became. But what they never tell you is that sometimes growth looks like being dismantled. Like losing everything you thought defined you. Like standing in the ruins of your former life with no guarantee that rebuilding will ever lead to recognition. Let alone redemption. And yet, somehow, that's exactly where I became who I was always meant to be. 6 months into my role as Chief Integrity Officer, I found myself changing in ways I couldn't have predicted. I wasn't just holding others accountable. I was holding myself accountable too. For every time I stayed silent when I shouldn't have. For every moment I gave benefit of the doubt to systems that never deserved it. For every year I equated hard work with immunity. I used to be someone who stayed late to prove her worth. Now I left when the work was done, and encouraged my team to do the same. I used to be someone who smiled through mistreatment just to keep the peace. Now I called out passive aggression in the moment, firmly, without apology. I used to believe that if you just kept your head down and did excellent work, you'd be seen, valued, protected. But now I know, excellence doesn't protect you if the people above you benefit from your invisibility. So I made it my mission to make others visible. I started a mentorship program, not for the top performers, but for the overlooked, the quiet ones, the new hires too scared to speak up in meetings, the mid-level women who'd been stuck in the same role for 5 years while flashier names leapfrogged them. We met weekly, no agendas, just space, safe, open, brutally honest space. And through those conversations, I watched something remarkable happen. They started to ask for more. Not because they were suddenly confident, but because someone had finally told them they could. One of them, Jordan, an introverted, detail-obsessed junior architect, told me in our 4th session, "I always thought I was lucky just to have a job here." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, Jordan, they're lucky to have you." 3 months later, she was promoted to lead a community project initiative that has since won 2 municipal awards. That wasn't luck, that was overdue recognition. And it made me wonder how many other people had been buried under grateful silence for years. It wasn't just the culture I was helping to shift. It was myself. I stopped second-guessing every hard conversation. I stopped minimizing my instincts. I stopped telling myself I needed to prove my value in boardrooms by softening my words. Instead, I got clearer, sharper, kinder, even, but never again smaller. That clarity bled into every part of my life. Hannah noticed it first. One night over dinner, she said, "You're lighter." I raised an eyebrow. "I've gained 5 pounds. She laughed. "No, I mean your spirit. You're not carrying guilt anymore." She was right. I had let go of the guilt that came with being the one who spoke out. The guilt of burning bridges, of not saving the company sooner, of not seeing the signs early enough. I had made peace with the fact that growth sometimes hurts, not because you failed, but because you outgrew the version of yourself that settled for less. I began taking care of myself in ways I hadn't before. Real boundaries, real rest, real joy. I picked up sketching again, just for me. Not for deadlines or client proposals. Just lines on paper, messy and unfinished and free. I started walking before sunrise. The city still asleep, letting the quiet remind me that movement didn't have to mean urgency. And most importantly, I stopped living in fear. Fear of being too much. Too principled. Too demanding. Too aware. That fear had kept me compliant for too long. But now I'd seen what happens when women like me refuse to shrink. We don't break the system overnight. But we start shaking it. And eventually, brick by crumbling brick, it begins to collapse under its own lies. I still had tough days. Days when I felt the old ache of betrayal rising in my chest. Days when I walked past Lucas's former office and remembered the look on his face the day I picked up his call and refused to make a deal. Days when imposter syndrome whispered, "You're only here because you uncovered the truth." As if that truth wasn't a badge of honor, but a scarlet letter. But I learned how to respond to those voices. I didn't argue with them anymore. I outworked them, outlived them, outgrew them. By the end of my first year, Avidra was different, not perfect, but real. We'd lost clients, yes. We'd faced scrutiny, but we also gained something more precious, trust. From the inside out, employees began speaking up more. Feedback became candid. Promotions were earned, not gifted. We built a culture where people could tell the truth and not be punished for it. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest growth of all. Not mine. Ours. A company finally learning that it's not enough to build structures that look good on the outside. You have to reinforce the foundation, or everything above it will eventually collapse. I think about that every time I pass the main atrium now. There's a quote etched into the new wall that wasn't there before. It was added during renovations after the board approved a full interior redesign, a symbol of Avidra's new era. It reads, "Strong foundations aren't seen, but they're felt, in everything we build." It's not attributed to me. It doesn't have to be. Because I see it in the eyes of the interns who ask bold questions. In the shoulders of women who no longer slump to make themselves smaller in conference rooms. In the architects who speak with pride again. That's the thing about growth. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. You've come farther than you thought. And you're not done yet. It took me 19 years to realize I didn't need permission to lead. Not a title. Not an office. Not someone else's approval. Just the truth, and the courage to stand behind it. The day I walked into Avidra as Chief Integrity Officer, I wasn't returning to the company I had left behind. That company no longer existed. And maybe that was a good thing. Because what remained after the fire, after the lies, the fallout, the public humiliation, was something new. Something worth shaping. It wasn't about rebuilding the old Avidra. It was about creating the right one. And every day I stepped into that role, I reminded myself, I'm not here to restore power to people like me. I'm here to make sure everyone has a voice, especially those who once felt voiceless. A few months ago, I was invited to speak at a leadership summit for women in architecture and design. It was a panel on resilience and change, full of industry veterans and up-and-comers, all sharing war stories from the front lines of corporate evolution. I almost said no, not because I didn't have a story, but because, for so long, my story had been one of endurance, not victory. But when I stood on that stage, looking out over rows of women, some wide-eyed, some worn down, some quietly nodding, I knew why I had to be there. Because survival is victory, and rebuilding yourself is the most radical form of leadership there is. I told them the truth, not the polished version. I told them about being erased, about sitting in a boardroom, blindsided by people who didn't see me as human, about walking down that hallway alone, heart cracking open in a building I helped build, about finding that tiny silver pendant in my drawer with the word endure etched into it, and realizing it wasn't just a gift, it was a command and a promise. I told them about the nights I couldn't sleep, the moments I thought I was crazy, the hours I spent documenting everything because I knew no one else would fight for what mattered if I didn't. And then I told them about the shift, the moment when being afraid no longer felt worse than being silent, the moment when I stopped waiting for rescue and became my own reckoning. I didn't need applause. I didn't need anyone to say, "You were right." I needed them to see that they could do the same. That power doesn't come from position. It comes from clarity, from knowing who you are and what you will, and won't, accept anymore. After the panel, a young woman approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25. She had short hair, nervous eyes, and a notebook filled with sketches. She said, "I almost quit last month. My manager told me I wasn't leadership material. That I was too quiet. Too idealistic." I smiled gently. "And now?" She looked at me, her voice trembling but strong. "Now I think I just haven't been in the right room yet." I reached for her hand. "You're not the problem," I said. "You're the solution that scares them." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. Moments like that don't make headlines. But they are the real blueprints. The invisible foundation that keeps people upright when everything above them shakes. Back at Avidra, things kept evolving. We didn't just change policies, we changed norms. We stopped rewarding urgency and started rewarding honesty. We redefined productivity to include mentorship. We made reflection a metric. We created failure reports, yes. Reports that documented what went wrong and what we learned, so people stopped hiding mistakes and started growing from them. We brought in students from underrepresented programs. Not to fulfill a diversity quota, but to listen, to see what fresh eyes noticed that we didn't. One of them asked me during a walkthrough, "What was the hardest part of blowing the whistle?" And I paused before answering. Because it wasn't the fear. It wasn't the fallout. It was the loneliness. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd misunderstood everything I thought was real about the place I had devoted my life to. But then I smiled. "Hardest part?" I said, believing that doing the right thing wouldn't cost me everything. "And did it?" he asked. I looked around. At the redesigned atrium. At the new artwork from local youth programs hanging proudly in the lobby. At the hallway named after the original 7 employees, including my name. Now etched in reclaimed wood. "No," I said, "it cost me something. But what I gained was worth more. Because what I gained was myself. My voice. My conviction. My belief in starting over. Not because you failed. But because you're brave enough to build something better." Today, when I touch the pendant around my neck, it doesn't feel like a weight anymore. It feels like a compass. A quiet reminder that you can lose your title, your job, your standing, but if you stay true to your core, no one can take your direction. So if you're reading this, or watching this, or sitting in your car wondering if it's time to speak up, time to walk away, time to start again, let this be your sign. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. You just have to be the one that doesn't stop speaking when it matters most. Because change doesn't always look like revolution. Sometimes it looks like one person refusing to look away. Sometimes it looks like you. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.